How does Nikon's 55mm 2.8 Micro Nikkor compare to the Nikkor 50mm 1.4Z? In this edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus, we will find out. The 50mm 1.4 Z mount came out on top in my normal lens tournament, where I compared 24 normal lenses from 50 to 58mm, 24 lenses that I had access to. And I put a link in the description below to the final video in that series. But I figured, why not compare the winner of that tournament to a lens that has a very excellent reputation, the 55mm 2.8 Micro Nikkor. It is considered one of the sharpest lenses in the Nikon line, and I've owned it for many years and always thought it was an excellent lens. But why not test it up against the winner of my lens tournament? And in the lens tournament, there were no macro lenses, just normal lenses. Now, I previously compared the 60mm 2.8 autofocus Nikkor macro lens to the 55 2.8, and I'll put a link in the description below to that video. First, why don't we look at the specs on these two lenses. So the 51.4Z was introduced in 2024, where the macro was introduced in 1979. The 51.4 has 9-bladed aperture, where the macro has 7. The 50 will focus down to 1.22 feet, so pretty close for a 50mm lens, or 0.372 meters, where the macro will get down to 9.86 inches, or 0.25 meters. Now, the macro at that close focus distance will get you down to 1 to 2, half life size. However, if you add the PK13 extension tube, it will take you down to 1 to 1. With the extension tube added, you'll be able to get from half life size to 1 to 1. 50 weighs 14.9 ounces, or 422 grams. The macro is 10 ounces, or 285 grams. Now, if you're going to use the macro on a mirrorless camera, you need to add an adapter. For Nikon, you would use the FTZ adapter, and that adds about 4 or 5 ounces to the weight, and also, of course, also to the size. The 50 takes 62mm filters. The macro, like many of the older Nikkor lenses, takes 52mm filters. The 50 will go from 1.4 to f/16 in 1/3 or 1/2 stops, which is settable on the camera. And the Micro Nikkor will go from its maximum aperture of 2.8 down to f/32 in full stops. Both lenses are multi-coated. The 50 takes a petal lens hood, which is shipped with the lens when you buy it new. And the macro originally did not ship with the lens hood. It's no longer available new, but you can use Nikon's HN3 lens hood, which was originally designed for some of their 35mm wide-angle lenses. Now, this lens front element is recessed quite a bit, so you really don't need a shade unless you put a filter on the lens. Now, the 55mm Micro Nikkor, being a macro lens, is optimized for close-up photography, but it has a very good reputation for general photography as well. So what I did some tests with my normal test setup that I used for my lens tournament. And I retested the 51.4 against the 55 2.8. And I'm going to post the original test images in an online gallery that you can view and download at no cost, so you can do the evaluation for yourself. Since the maximum aperture of the micro is 2.8, I started the testing at 2.8, and they're very close in the center, but as you get out to the edge, the newer lens is superior. Now, this is at an 8.5 foot distance from my test setup. Now, I am not going to zoom into these images here. I think it's best if you just look at the actual images, download those images and look at them yourself, and you will see the difference that I see, I believe. So I also tested, of course, at f4, basically the same at f4, close in the center. As you get away from the center, the newer lens is superior. At 5.6, they're very close, both center and edge. And at f8, I could say they are exactly the same. Now, I also have the older version of this lens, of the 55-2.8, the 55-3.5. So I did a quick comparison at two apertures, at 5.6 and at f8. And there's not a big difference in the center, but as you get out to the edges, the 55-2.8 is superior. And I also put in the link those two apertures that were tested for the 55-3.5. So in addition to these shots at 8.5 feet in my basement of my test setup, I also wanted to take the lens out and do some quick shots at infinity. And it was a very cold, windy, more windy than cold, but the wind chill was very low. And I went out to Gloucester City, New Jersey on the Delaware River. And from that spot, you could look across to Philadelphia, and there were some ships being unloaded. So I took a few quick shots of a few of the ships and the Walt Whitman Bridge and a few other things around there, and I'm posting those images as well in the link to the online gallery. What I found that in the center, they were very close. But as you went out to the edge at infinity, the newer lens was superior. And I'm really not surprised at that because, again, this is a macro lens. It's a much older lens. And this new 51.4 I feel is excellent. Now, I don't have the 55mm 1.8 Z mount, which is supposed to be superior to this 51.4. And I don't doubt that because almost everything I have read, in fact, everything I have read on that lens states that it is one of the sharpest 50mm lenses. And people who compared the two, the 51.8 to the 51.4, say it's sharper, but this newer lens, the 1.4, just has some more character. And I really like it. I've shot it at 1.4. I've shot it at f2 in very low light situations, and it performs excellently. So in conclusion, I can't say I'm disappointed in the performance of this Micro Nikkor because it's extremely sharp lens. It's just away from center, out to the edges, that the newer lens is superior at the wider apertures. And you normally don't shoot a macro lens at 2.8 or f4. I'm usually shooting it at f8 or even f11. You're stopping it down in the macro range to get maximum depth of field. Now, one other thing, Nikon calls their macro lenses Micro Nikkors, where just about everybody else calls them macro lenses, but I guess the terms are interchangeable. And I prefer this lens to the newer AFD autofocus 60mm 2.8 Nikkor lens, mainly because of the manual focus. The manual focus on this lens is silky smooth. So finally, the 51.4 is still the sharpest lens that I own between 50 and 58 millimeters, even compared to the Micro Nikkor. But of course, if I'm going to shoot close-ups, I'm going to use the Micro Nikkor. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I usually publish a new video every Monday morning and Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon.